Hey guys, Trent White here for group number one. I'm going to be doing our presentation for MSIS 5623 fall of 2018. The topic that we chose for our presentation is web page design and maintenance. So I'm going to be going over first some high-level introductory information, and then we're going to go into some new technologies and trends in the web design space. And then we're going to go into some security issues that come along with a presence on the internet. So before we can go into the new technologies and trends in the web design world, let's first just cover some base information here. We can go over how the internet actually works. So every time you go out and open a web page, this is what's happening. First, a request is made via your web browser, and it's sent through your internet service provider. So that could be AT&T, it could be Verizon, could be whoever. The ISP then contacts a domain name server, and we're going to go over in just a little bit what exactly a domain name server actually is. The domain name server tells your internet service provider what the address is of the web page. And you might be thinking, well, I gave it the address, it's google.com. Well, not exactly. And we'll go over that in just a second. So after the domain name server tells the ISP where to go, the ISP then tries to contact the target web server with the request. The web server gets the request and then splits the data that you've requested into packets and sends it back through the ISP, and then the ISP tells your browser who then interprets these packets and displays them back to you, the user. And in order to do all this, you have to have some specific hardware, namely a modem and a router. I've found that some people who aren't familiar with what exactly these devices do will use modem and router interchangeably, but they're actually different devices. A modem converts digital signal generated by the computer into analog signals, which can then be transmitted over telephone or cable line, and transforms incoming analog signals back into the digital equivalents for use by your internet browser. The router is a device that actually joins the networks together and routes all of the traffic that's going in and out. Okay. Clients. So you have a client and a server in any internet situation. The devices used to access the internet are called clients. The clients are the ones that make the requests. The servers are the ones that receive the requests and send back the requested data. So your clients are going to be your personal computer, your smartphone, your tablet, any device that you use to connect to the internet and send requests to servers. Protocols. A protocol is just a fancy word for a set of rules. That's all it is. These are a few important protocols involved in internet use. HTTP is the one that comes in front of what you type into your web browser, http://www.google.com. Hypertext it's a structured text that uses logical links or hyperlinks between nodes containing text. So HTTP is the protocol for exchange or transfer of hypertext. And then you've got TCP, which is Transmission Control Protocol, and Internet Protocol. TCP and IP kind of go hand in hand. I don't want to read through this whole paragraph. It's kind of long, but basically TCP defines how to establish and maintain a network conversation with apps that can exchange data. And then there's your internet service provider. We kind of touched on this already. Um, your ISP is you who connects you to the rest of the world. Could be Verizon, AT&T, Suddenlink, whoever. And so what they do is they route the request to receive to a server further up the chain from you, and eventually the request will hit the domain name server and then go on to the server that you are sending the request to. So a domain name server, we touched on this earlier. So what a domain name server does is um, when you type in, for example, www.google.com, that's not actually how the computer finds the server that you're sending a request to. Um, the server that you're sending the request to has to be reached via an IP address. So that could be like 123.456.78.12. Um, all servers have those IP addresses. But of course, it wouldn't be easy for all of us to go around remembering all of the IP addresses of all of our favorite websites. So what a domain name server does is it stores those IP addresses, and then the www.google.com is sort of like an alias. So when you type that in, google.com, into your web browser, it sends that google.com to a domain name server, which then says, okay, they want google.com, here's the IP address for that one. And then that then routes your request to the server at that IP. So that's how a domain name server works. It basically just exists so that we don't have to go around remembering a bunch of IP addresses. Packets are how data is transmitted over the internet. Rather than sending the data all at once, the web server breaks the data up into packets and sends them over the internet to your computer. Your computer then has to reassemble all of those packets into something that it can use. Okay, so now that we've got all of that covered, let's go into human behavior. We're going to talk about how the widespread and deeply ingrained use of the internet in our daily lives, how it has affected us as humans, has changed our behaviors and our habits, and what we expect out of everyday life. Let's go into that here. So mobile phones. It's no secret that within the last 10 to 15 years, mobile technology has affected our lives very deeply. Today, 95% of Americans own a cell phone. 77% of Americans own a smartphone. So just over 3/4 of all Americans own a smartphone. Americans on average touch their phones 2,617 times per day, and 50% of Americans check them in the middle of the night. That does not include me, for sure. I don't check my phone in the middle of the night. But apparently 50% of Americans do. Phones are used for practically everything: news, videos, navigation, streaming, shopping, you name it. And it's no secret that smartphones have radically changed the way, I would venture to say, most people work and live. And this has become a little bit of a problem. You've got virtual relationships where people will substitute online relationships for real life relationships. And some experts have said that online relationships are certainly not healthy as a substitution outright for real life interactions. As humans, we need interactions in the non-virtual world. You've got an overload of information on a daily basis, which leads to lower productivity, neglection, which can be harmful to real-world relationships. I'll go out sometimes to a restaurant with my wife, and you look around, and sometimes it's just interesting to count how many tables there are in that restaurant where there's two people sitting across from each other at a table, and both of them are looking at their phones. They're not talking to each other. They're not engaging in the situation. They're just there together, but they're both on their phones. And we're guilty of it too. My wife and I sometimes, we'll sit down at the table and both get our phones out. So, I mean, everybody's guilty of it, but it can be harmful if you let it go too far. And then there's online compulsations, which are, gambling, shopping. The addictive behaviors are now so accessible anywhere we go, wherever we are, because we have our smartphones with us. So the addiction is real. 44% of people report feeling anxiety when they're away from their phone. 37% have a real fear that they're going to miss out on something just because they're away from their mobile device. 60%, which is large, say that they wish their family members would unplug more often. I think that's very interesting. 27% said they've been told the same thing. So, um, they're wishing family members would unplug, and they're having family members tell them that they should unplug. Um, I think that's very interesting, and I personally would be interested to read more on that. Excuse me. Focus. Um, so, we all know when we're sitting there studying or working, and then all of a sudden our phone goes off. We've gotten a comment on our Facebook post, or someone has texted us, or whatever, and it just completely breaks the focus of what we were doing. So nearly all smartphone apps support some sort of notification system, and I know that this is definitely true. Just the mere presence of your phone has an effect on your ability to think, according to Harvard Business Review. So you don't even have to be looking at it. Just the fact that it's there with you has an effect on your ability to focus on what you're doing. One of the reasons smartphone addiction is so rampant is because of the fear of missing out. So what was that? Let's go back a slide. 37% of people fear they'll miss out on something just because they don't have their smartphone with them. So that point reiterates here. One of the reasons for this addiction is because you don't want to miss out on something. But in fact, it's rare that an incoming notification is so important that it's worthy of interrupting your current focus, whether it be work, social situation, an academic venture, what have you. So now we can look at how web development needs to adapt in light of all of this information. So we're going to touch on user empowerment, a couple of laws that can be applied, a few other things here. User empowerment. So one direction that web development can go is to give users a sense of importance, growth, and happiness. To make users, feel good about using your product. Account for the lurker, which are users who surf Facebook, for instance, but never make posts. These users make up the majority of people who visit the average website. They come to the website, they look at it, they read all the information, but they just don't interact with the website. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you account for these, you can make your user feel better when they're finished interacting with your product. Accessibility, stability, usability, reliability, functionality, and flexibility. Hicks' law and user focus. This is a very interesting one to me as well. Hicks' law explains that the more options there are available when you're trying to make a decision, the longer the process is of making a decision. So if you're trying to choose a flavor of ice cream, for example, you have chocolate and vanilla. I know, at least myself, I'm going to be able to instantly know which one I want. But when I walk into Brahms and there's a 6 foot long counter full of different flavors of ice cream, it takes me longer to decide what I want for sure. Um, which leads into the next point there. Users want a lot of options, but they also don't. Um, too many options makes it difficult to come to a decision and can even cause decision paralysis, which is taking so long to make a decision because there are too many options and you're experiencing anxiety about making the wrong decision. So you just don't make a decision. Utilizing UI controls can help alleviate these issues. Um, and then you can also purge unnecessary content and options to make the experience more simple. Depth of processing refers to the level to which information has to be processed in order to be committed to memory. So, you know, the more simple your website is, the shorter the depth of processing is going to be for the user using that website. Users do not want to be hassled with questions or have their browsing interfered with. Um, Again, just working towards the objective of making the websites simpler and easier to use. Attractive bias and personality. So the attractiveness bias theory states that a good-looking design will draw more attention than a poor design. Um, and I can attest to this. You go to a website, and if it just looks like it's straight out of the early 90s, um, you're going to instantly think, this website can't be good for anything, and might not even spend any time there. But if you go to a highly modernized looking design, that's very, you know, appealing to the eye, interactive, um, you're going to instantly think that the content is going to be better on that website, which it might not actually be. Okay, so content, though, the personality, is the most important part of a website. A beautiful UI becomes less important when people learn what's underneath. In other words, beauty only goes so deep. And with websites, what should be underneath is quality content. There's one exception, though. If you're famous, your website can be terrible and people are still going to visit it, which is called brand recognition. So if you're Kim Kardashian, go ahead and create a flashy website for yourself and just put complete crap on your website. People are still going to come to it because you're Kim Kardashian. Colors and their meanings. So color palettes have a huge impact, actually, on how people feel when they come to your website. And these are just, I'm not going to go over all of these. This is another quite wordy explanation, but you can just see how each color can invoke different reactions in the user. So just let me pick one out here. Gray is going to be neutrality, formality, and melancholy. And black, power, edginess, and sophistication. So if you want something that's elegant and formal, you might go black and gray, for example. Blue, calm, safety, openness. So if you want something that's going to lull your users into a sense of relaxation, something where they can feel safe and calm, go with blue. That's the effect that colors can have, and can affect the message that you're sending on your web page. So Fitts' law and cognitive load. Fitts' law states that the time and effort required to reach a target depends on the distance and the size of the target. So how this relates to web design? Well, it's most relevant when designing the degree of usability of user interfaces. Cognitive load describes how our learning performance is reduced when we have many things we have to do at once. So, when you go to a web page, if you've got 3 pop-ups coming at you, a bunch of ads, the article that you're originally trying to get to, and that article may not even be on the first page. You have to click a link to go to a different page and navigate the website. That's going to be a lot of cognitive load. You have a lot that you have to process. So as I was referring to a couple of slides ago, the need is to work in the direction of a simpler website. Make your web page easier to use by your users, and it will provide a better experience for them. Okay, so we've touched on some very basic information, such as how the internet works. We've also gone into how the digital age has affected the human experience a little bit. So you should by now have a good overview of what we're working into here. So now we can actually touch on the new technologies and trends in web development. And most of these here, 3 out of the 5 of my points here are going to be working towards supporting the shift toward mobile technology. As the majority of Americans now have mobile devices and aren't sitting at a desk on a desktop computer when they're on the internet, web design has to cater to that and make their websites and web applications easier to use on those mobile devices so that their users will continue coming there. So mobile first design. This is sort of a hot keyword, a hot buzzword rather, in the web app and website design space. What it actually means is that when developers are initially designing and optimizing their website, rather than building it for a desktop computer, assuming that their user is going to be on a desktop computer, and then scaling that down so that it can be used, albeit maybe not in an optimized fashion on a mobile device. When you do mobile first design, you're designing that website or web application for a mobile device first. You're going to make sure that the best experience possible can be had on a mobile device, and then you're going to scale that up so that it can be used on a desktop later as a secondary objective. And that's done because of the assumption that when a user comes to your website or to your web application, they're probably going to be on a mobile device. That's the highest chance. It's not desktop computer anymore. So this puts the ease of use and effectiveness of viewing the website on a mobile device at the heart of the design, as I explained. And again, just to reiterate, this strategy was developed because of the assumption that users today are most likely to be viewing that web page on a mobile device. Progressive web applications. This one was actually new to me. So a recent study found that nearly 90% of the mobile device usage in time around the world was accounted for in mobile apps rather than, for example, a web browser on a mobile device. So what a web app does is a progressive web app, rather, these are web applications that appear to the user as a mobile app, but it's really, truly a web page. And what this does is it takes advantage of the features of a web browser, but then it delivers an app-like experience, which obviously is what most people want. They want to be using a quote-unquote app. So these progressive web apps are taking advantage of that in order to enable users to still be able to come to their web page. Single-page websites. These are websites which are just one long web page rather than multiple pages through which you navigate with the drop-down menus or the links. Excuse me. The single-page website is navigated just how you would think. You scroll down on the single web page. Sometimes there are links at the top which will jump down to specific parts of the one web page. And what this does is it takes advantage of simplicity. When you've only got one web page, rather than, multiple web pages. It's a very simple website design which works very well on mobile devices where scrolling with that thumb is the easiest navigation method. So it makes your website very easy to use on mobile devices. It's also easier to maintain too from a web development perspective because you've only got that one web page with all of your content. Okay. So now let's go into some web development frameworks. So I'll explain to you here what a web development framework is, and then we'll go over a few of the most popular ones today. Development frameworks are tools and libraries that other developers have created to make developing in a particular language, say JavaScript, PHP maybe, easier. These frameworks allow developers to avoid reinventing the wheel because you can take advantage of the pre-built functionality that the developers of the framework constructed. So they'll build this functionality easily usable into their framework, and then you don't have to rebuild that functionality. If you're using that framework, it's right there at your fingertips. And what this has done is it has made building complex websites and web applications in recent years much easier than when developers had to go out, write their own code from scratch, write everything from basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript without using a framework. So now we can go over a few of the most popular ones today. First up is React. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. One of React's key strengths is that it is very good at creating UIs which are very efficient. So what React will do is when the data behind the web page is updated, it'll only update that component of the UI rather than updating the entire UI. And so that makes it very efficient and very fluid, a very dynamic UI. Angular. Angular is a framework for building applications. And what Angular does is it makes it very easy to implement complex functionality into apps, such as data binding, which is binding parts of your web app to data on the back end, and also animations. Angular is also cross-platform, which means it can be used to develop on both mobile devices and non-mobile. So you've got one framework across all of your devices, which makes it very easy to implement very complex applications. Node.js. So Node.js is actually a runtime that enables the use of JavaScript as a server-side language, so in lieu of PHP, for example. This means that one language can be used for both front-end and back-end development, which makes for faster application development and higher maintainability. So another new technology trend in web development is advanced data visualization and interactivity. With the amount of data that exists in the world today, and that is increasing exponentially every day, it has become increasingly important to effectively visualize that data. And effectiveness of data visualization is enhanced by interactivity. So enter technologies such as D3.js. This is an example of a client-side data visualization technology. It's actually another JavaScript library. And I have an example for you here of a data visualization that was built with D3. Let's see if this will work. we go. Okay, so as you can see here, we have a donut chart, which looks great. This is attached to data on the back end. I'm not actually sure what exactly this data is looking at. I think it's looking at keywords in a language, maybe D3. The cool thing about this, though, is watch what happens when I click something. We're going to drill down into this data. Every time I click one of the pieces of this pie chart, now I'm zooming back out, we can drill down into this data. Okay, what portion of this data is util? Okay, it's that much. How much of util is math? Okay, well, it accounts for that much. And then we can drill down into math even. What percentage, what is the usage of math? And here you go, drill back out. So it's beautiful, it's interactive, and that's D3. Okay. So now let's go into our final subject here, which is internet security. So we've talked about how the internet works. We've talked about how it affects us. We've talked about some of the newer technologies and trends. Internet security is the natural next step in this conversation. With all of the mobile technology that we have and all of in the digital age, the privacy concerns, the attacks, the viruses, these are real concerns in today's age. So first of all, privacy concerns. And some of the concerns come, largely because of we have our mobile devices with us all the time. So cookies track internet activity and store information about the user. So with cookies, a website can look at what other websites you've been to and store information about you for use by that website. And this could be as simple as storing your username and password so that the next time you come to that website, you don't have to log in again if you enable, remembering your password. But it could store other things too, and that's where some of the privacy concerns come in because we don't know what it's storing. Location tracking. So, we all know that when we go to Google Maps and type in an address to get some directions, Google can tell us where we are, where we need to go, and it can show us where we are at along the way. So location tracking features of mobile apps allow other parties to know where we are and where we have been. And this obviously is a privacy concern. And information submitted via web forms is at risk for being sold to a third party. So when you submit your information to a website for whatever reason, whoever owns that website could possibly be selling that information to advertisers or research companies or whatever, third party. You don't know who it is. That's where the concern comes in. And I don't know how common this is, but it is definitely a concern when someone else has your information. Okay, so server attacks. A few types of attacks here. A DDoS attack, distributed denial of service. These attacks occur when someone coordinates many devices with bots, usually, and those bots flood a website with external requests. So they just hit that website over and over and over again, overwhelming that server, which then can't handle all of that traffic, rendering that website unavailable for users. They effectively take down the website. Brute force attacks are attempts to actually gain access to the website or server by just guessing rapidly every possible combination of username and password. Database attacks. So SQL injection attacks occur when a database query is modified by injecting code into a query. So when you've got a website such as D3, which is visualizing data, you know that there's data on the back end of that. Well, that data is likely stored in a database, which means there's a query behind that web page. An SQLI attack occurs when someone injects their own code into that query. These attacks are particularly common on e-commerce sites because attackers know and expect that there's going to be a large database existing behind that website. These attacks are fairly common because they are one of the easiest and most basic types of attacks for hackers to execute. Phishing. So surely we've all heard of phishing. I know we get training on this regularly at my job. So phishing occurs when someone contacts others pretending to be a legitimate person or organization. Hey, this is your CEO. I'm stuck in Bosnia and I need $2,000 because I lost my plane ticket. They're asking for money. They're asking for personal information, whatever. And when most people think of phishing, they think of emails. But phishing can occur in other media as well, such as phone calls or text messages. Just a little bit of interesting history for you. The first phishing lawsuit was filed in 2004, actually against a teenager who created an imitation website of AOL. And with that fake website, the teenager was able to gain sensitive information from users and actually took money out of their bank accounts. Viruses. Viruses are a type of malicious file. These files are written in a way that seeks to alter the way a computer operates. Viruses are designed to spread from host to host and is designed to replicate itself along the way. And the ways that viruses can spread are email, text message attachments, internet downloads, app downloads, and URLs. Okay, guys, so that was our presentation on web design and maintenance. We went over some basic information on how the internet works, how internet and mobile usage has affected our behaviors and our habits. We also went over some new designs and some new technologies rather, and some trends, and also some concerns about the use of the internet. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact Alex Cooper or myself, Trenton White. Of course, you can find us in the class list on Brightspace, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks, guys.